Demian Brady is joining us. He is with the National Taxpayers Union, and they have done a national state-by-state analysis of what happens if the Trump 2017 tax cuts don't get reauthorized. You know, we've talked about it a lot here. They claimed as an opponent of those tax cuts, because they don't want you to have more of your own money that you've earned and you should be able to keep, that this was tax cuts for the rich. But these are talking points from people who have no idea what they're saying. But if you look at actual data, and you know I love data, the IRS says 91% of American households were positively impacted by the 2017 tax cuts. Before we get to Demian, Dove Sachs just walked in the door. How are you?
Hey, thank God.
And Dave Chulo is here from Career Management Associates. Always great to have Dave here. Dave, I know you're going to have some interest in this as someone who deals in human resources. So
Yeah.
Demian Brady is joining us right now from the National Taxpayers Union. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for having me on. It's a great day to talk about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
It certainly is. And as you know, there is one big, beautiful bill down in D.C., at least that's what Speaker Johnson is calling it, that will reauthorize the 17 tax cuts, get rid of tax on tips, get rid of tax on overtime, get rid of tax on Social Security, and also make auto interest on American-made automobiles tax deductible. So let's talk about the 17 tax cuts as part of this big, beautiful bill. You've done a state-by-state analysis of what it will mean if they aren't reauthorized. Share with us your data, if you would.
Yeah, sure. It's worth just remembering back to what happened since 2017 and just how important the Trump tax cuts were. They were passed in 2017, went into effect in 2018, and then we started to see wages rise across the country. And as the Democrats like to say, this was just tax cuts for the rich, but it benefited 80%, 80 to 90% of all households. We saw incomes rising, especially among lower income earners. Their wages were rising the fastest. We saw great growth in the economy, and everything got messed up once we hit the pandemic. But now we're at a point where these tax cuts are set to expire, and we need to remember how important they were in jump-starting the economy. And so if they're allowed to expire at the end of this year, that's going to be a massive tax hike on families all around the country. And we have a state-by-state analysis at ntu.org/states, and you can see that in Maine, if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is allowed to expire, Maine taxpayers will face an average tax hike of about $2,200. I mean, that's probably about worth 2 to 3 months worth of groceries. So that's going to be a big hit to people's pockets, and it's going to hurt the economy.
Well, there's no question that that's true. And, Maine is a poor state. We're in the bottom 5 of states as far as household income, where tragically we are trailing New Hampshire, the state that is closest to us and the only state that borders us. Household incomes in New Hampshire are $19,300 higher than household incomes in Maine. So $2,200, and that's after tax dollars. That's what you're talking about here. That would be devastating to Maine families. Some of the families in Maine, and let me rephrase that, a lot of the families in Maine, $2,200 is their monthly take-home pay. So it's like taking away 1 month of their income, so you're only getting 11 months paid this year. It's just nonsense.
And, there would also be an impact on state taxes in Maine, too, because Maine's tax system is closely tied to the federal government. So once the federal government, if the federal taxes revert to what happened before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that's going to impact state level taxes too. So instead of not just getting a federal hit, but you'll get a state hike too. One of the biggest elements of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act for personal tax breaks was the doubling of the standard deduction. And so that not only saved lots of tax dollars for people by providing a minimum exemption from taxes, but it also greatly simplified tax filing because you don't have to itemize anymore and spend all that time on receipts and paperwork. It was a big free up of time we've calculated over the country. So that would impact Maine as well if this is allowed to expire. So this was really important just to let your representatives and your senators know how important it is to retain the tax cuts to protect households across all income levels and to help protect the economy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. It's We are an overtaxed state. We're the second highest tax burden state in the country now that the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act tax took place in January, which may not be calculated in a lot of formulas by people do, but we're all feeling it here because it was a 1% tax between employers and employees. And tax burden is worse than highest taxes because it's based on ability to pay. And so if this is not reauthorized, and we know there's a lot of dance with the Freedom Caucus in the House right now over this bill that they're trying to get passed, if that is not reauthorized, Maine people are going to be in a more devastating situation than they're currently in. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's that you just show why this is so important that we make sure we get this across the finish line. It's pretty impressive that we've gotten this far already in the process in the House and the Senate. They're both working behind the scenes diligently on these things, and we're really looking forward to seeing what comes out for a good broad-based tax relief for Americans and businesses.
You know, you brought up the standard deduction. I believe I'm correct about this. If I'm off, I'm sure somebody will tell me. But I believe this year for a married couple is $29,200. That's a big deduction off your taxable income. Most people don't have those kind of itemizations so that they could deduct it so their taxable income was smaller. People don't think about that. But let's say that your income is $50,000. You take $29,000 off of that. Suddenly, if I'm doing the math correctly, that's $21,000 left over in taxable income. That's a huge difference because most people here, the biggest item most people deduct is mortgage interest. And for people here, that's probably not going to get them to that $29,200. It's a big jump. It's incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, that was a really important part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, doubling the standard deduction. It provided a lot of broad-based tax relief, especially for lower-income households. One untold story about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is how progressive it was because it relieved so many lower-income households from tax burdens,
right?
Through segments of the bill like the standard deduction.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. We always hear tax cuts for the rich. It's the only thing is people know how to say because they have nothing to offer this country in the form of a positive measure, positive policy. But the truth is, as we mentioned earlier, the IRS says 91% of American households were positively impacted. But with $29,200 as for a married couple, I believe that's the number in 24. I think that's it. You know, a lot of people don't even have income that high that would be considered taxable. So now they pay no federal income tax whatsoever. And we know, according to the Internal Revenue Service, the top 1% pays 43.2% of all income taxes, and the top 10% pay 90% of all income taxes. So that's based on current models with the current 2017 tax in place, which means most of the people of the country don't pay federal income taxes because of this tax law.
Yeah, we've tracked all the historical data that's available about that at ntu.org/who-pays-taxes. And just going back to the Reagan tax cuts, we've seen that the share of income taxes paid by the wealthy Americans has increased with every successive major tax reform bill. That is just making the code more and more progressive. So, I mean, some people might have some concerns about that, but, you know, it's important to make sure that we protect Trump's tax cuts from 2017 because it's going to hurt so many people.
Yeah, there's no question about that. We're talking with Demian Brady. He is with the National Taxpayers Union. Dave Chulo is here from Career Management Associates, which is Maine's leading outsourced HR firm. Dave, you had a question?
Yeah, I just have a question. You mentioned we've been talking a lot about individuals. Talk a little about the business side. You said that there was some business tax breaks in this as well, or continuation. And what happens if those don't get renewed?
Yeah, well, a lot of businesses file through the individual income side, so they would be hurt a lot. And that's a lot of small businesses across the country. And then one big element that was included in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act allowed for 100% full expensing for businesses to be able to get immediately account for all the investments that they've made. Trump wants to bring that back as part of the new big beautiful bill. I mean, we saw a lot of job growth because of that. Businesses being allowed to properly account quickly for all the investments that they're making and encourage investment and encourage productivity and job growth.
Yeah, you're specifically talking about LLCs and S corps, right, where that income is brought into the individual's total income.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
You know, one of the things of this bill that they're working on that would also reauthorize the 2017 tax cuts and job investment is the fact that now, if this all passes, and we'll see what happens, the Republicans are very much like pushing a rope or herding cats. We all know that. I'm a Republican, have been all my life, but it's still true. But being able to deduct automobile interest from automobiles that are purchased, that are made here in America, that's another great benefit here. Not only does that help people on their taxes because it deducts money from your taxable income, but it also encourages Americans to buy American, and that's another big benefit of that idea. I love that.
Yeah, definitely. We're trying to help Congress create a broad-based package of tax relief for Americans across all income levels, and that's building on what we did back in 2017. It's very important to keep moving forward and make sure that Congress gets this across the finish line.
Demian, a lot of times people who oppose my kind of thinking will say, this just benefits the rich, nothing good comes from it. Talk about the economic stimulus that will occur in this country if they get this big, beautiful package passed. And we all know from history what happened after 2017 and how we had an economic boom. But talk about how this will positively impact the economy.
Yeah, definitely. After 2017, we saw bigger paychecks. Within 2 years, the average household saw an income boost of $6,000. We saw job growth. We saw record unemployment. We saw faster growth, especially for low-income earners. And so all that is at risk if we fail to extend and preserve Trump's tax cuts.
Yeah, you talked about household incomes going up. I'm trying to find this quickly in a book I wrote, but the Hoover Institute did an analysis, and under George Bush's 8 years, incomes went up. Household incomes went up about $500 total during the 8 years. Now, part of that was what happened clearly with 9/11 and what happened to the economy there. Under Barack Obama's 8 years, household incomes went up on average about $1,500 during Barack Obama's 8 years. Under Trump's first 3 years, which is when my book ends, it ends in 19, so it doesn't address the pandemic. But according to the Hoover Institute, household incomes in this country under Trump went up $5,000, which is 3 times Obama and 10 times Bush, and he did it in 3 years. And I think that's the difference between having politicians and businessmen running the country's government.
And we've been doing some polling, NTU along with the Tax Foundation, and we're talking to people, seeing how much they remember about what happened after the Trump tax cuts. And one person was saying that their taxes actually went up, and when you talk to him, you found out that he ran a business, and his business did so much better, he ended up in a higher tax bracket. But he was better off all over, compared to what was going on before. So it's important to remember things like that. We saw a growing economy and growing paychecks.
Yeah, what a tragedy that is. You do so well, you're making so much more money in your business that you actually go to the next tax bracket, and that's how you remember it. But the truth of the matter is you're doing much better, which is why you climbed in the next tax bracket. Personally, I'm against all that. I think I would love to see us just get rid of the income tax. I think the income tax is immoral and go to a consumption tax, which is a greater measure of wealth anyhow, if that's what the progressive element wants. But a flat tax on income I would go with. But that's what happens. People don't remember correctly. If he was paying 12% or 15%, suddenly he's paying maybe 20%. Well, that's because his income went up dramatically, and because of that, he qualified for the next tax bracket. So it's crazy stuff, how we look at stuff. I bet his wife was happy he was making all that extra money.
Yeah, probably so, yeah. It's that's why it's important just remember the history of it and just how beneficial the tax cuts from 2017 were, because so much has happened since then, people might not completely remember.
Yeah. Well, we do have short memories in this country, and obviously a lot of what happened positively under Trump the first time is clouded by COVID because a lot of us, we had rugged experiences during COVID. But I think we've seen in the first 100 days, he said he would do things, and he's done them. He said he would secure the border. He has. He said he would rework trade deals. We now have 72 countries who are renegotiating trade deals with this country, which is going to make us stronger. Sometimes you have to take a bold swipe at things in order to step back for a moment and renegotiate. What you're doing essentially is getting their attention. It's like, although I didn't do it because I was very marshmallow father, some people will give a swat on the behind to a child to get their attention. That's kind of what we needed to do with these countries. Give them a swat on the behind and get their attention and say, we're tired of you taking advantage of us. Now, I didn't do that. Dave Chulo's looking at me, Damian, and he's like, I can't tell what his expression is. I didn't do that. I was a marshmallow. I couldn't do it. But some people do that, and there's nothing wrong with it.
And I was just going to add, he's also doing that to a degree with the federal government going through and trying to root out the waste because, as we preserve these tax cuts for the good of the economy, we also have to rein in federal spending, which far outpaces how much we collect in taxes every year. So that's the other side of this as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. We're talking with Demian Brady. He's with the National Taxpayers Union. Think about that for a moment, the wailing and gnashing of teeth that is going on in this nation as our leaders of our government are now making a concerted effort to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. Who could be against that? But they are.
There's been some pushback to some elements of this. I'm really looking forward to Trump's next budget proposal, which it's usually out by now, but there's always a bit of a delay after a presidential transition. So looking forward to seeing how they can quantify the savings that they've achieved so far and what their plans are going forward to help rein in out-of-control spending.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Guys, you got any more questions? Damian, we appreciate you being on. Thanks for sharing this information. I just want to remind everyone what you've said through the National Taxpayer Union's analysis. If we don't reauthorize the 2017 tax cuts, Mainers will feel the impact at about $2,200 a year, which for many, many people could be their take-home pay for a month. In essence, meaning that instead of getting 12 months of take-home pay, you would effectively only get 11. Damian, thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
We have got to run. We'll be right back with Dove Sachs and Dave Chulo.